Hey, welcome back to another video on the channel, and today we're going to be talking about the power of compound interest. Now, in this video, I aim to tackle the topics of what interest is, the types of interest, the benefits of compound interest specifically, and how you can best use compound interest. So, let's begin. And let's begin with what interest is. Now, interest is the cost of borrowing money. And I know that sounds a little weird, so I'm going to give you some examples, right? And before I give you some examples and some better ways of thinking about it, I'm going to first split up interest into two kind of subcategories. Now, these aren't like hard and fast, but I like to use them because they really get you to actually think about interest in its most basic terms. So let's talk about interest in a positive sense and in a negative sense. So let's start with the positive sense. Now, the positive sense is where you get paid for money you either gave to someone or you placed somewhere. Now, that still sounds weird, so let's look at an example. An example would be if you got money, you put money into the bank, right? And now, in annual installments, like once a year, typically, you'll get more money, or you'll get some money back. And that money is interest, because you're letting the bank borrow your money, but they have to pay the cost of borrowing, so they pay you interest. In a negative sense, interest is pretty much the same thing, just the shoe's on the other foot. You are in the position of the borrower, right? So now you have to pay someone more when you borrowed their money. For example, again with the bank, if you take out a loan instead, now if the loan was for $100, you might have to pay $101 or $105 or $110. And that extra $1, $5, $10, or $20 is interest because you borrowed money, so you had to obviously pay back the money you borrowed, but you also had to pay back the cost of it, the extra $1 to $20. So let's take a look at the types of interest now instead of just the positive and negative side of it. So interest has two main categories, simple and compounding. Simple interest involves the same amount being added continuously. Now let's look at what that means. It means that if you had $100 and the interest rate was 10% annually, so let's see what that means. 10% annually means you'll get 10% of that $100 every year. Now what's 10% of 100? It's 10. So you're going to get 10% every year. So in 3 years, you're going to have $130. That is, well, for lack of a better term, simple. And now we also have compounding interest, and that's what the video is really about. Now, compounding interest is a little bit weirder. So compounding interest as the amount added depends on the current amount of money, which sounds kind of like simple interest, but let's break it down into a year-by-year thing. Now let's say you have the same situation. You have $100 and the interest rate is 10%, but now it's compounding interest. So let's look at the first year. And let's actually go back to simple and look at the first year. The first year in the simple interest situation, you have $100 plus that extra 10%. So you have $110. Now in the compounding one, you have $100 plus what's 10% of 100? 10 still. You still have $110. Makes sense. In the next year of simple, you have, well, 120. You're adding another 10. But now compounding is a little bit different. Compounding saying you have $110 in the bank account now. Now multiply that. Now take a tenth of that and add it on, right? So instead of taking a tenth of the original amount, you take a tenth of the new amount. You take the interest rate comes from the current amount instead of the original amount. So in this situation, we had $110. Now what's 10% of 110? That's 11. So you're going to add $11 to this. So by year 2, you actually have $121. So you've made an extra dollar here. And as you can see by year 3, you get about $3.10 extra, which really doesn't seem like that much. But compound interest is very powerful, and let's take a look at that now. So first, I really like this graph on the left because it just really easily shows how compound interest varies from simple interest. Now, if you want to look at this through a more mathematical lens, and I know I love that, so simple interest is a linear function. It's a straight line. Compounding interest is exponential. as in the more years pass, the exponentially higher it gets. And also, it gets way higher in comparison to simple interest. And I think that's best shown with this chart on the right. So here we're setting interest rate at 10% again. Also, if you're wondering why I'm setting interest rate at 10%, it's because one of the best places to invest to see compound interest is the stock market. And the S&P 500, or the top 500 companies in the stock market, they have an average of about 10% per year. So that's kind of a random number, but there is a reason behind it. Anyway, if we look at simple interest versus compound interest, simple interest, 10%, 10 years, 20 years. It's pretty simple. You go 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. Now, compound interest is more interesting. The first year, you go from 1,000 to 2,509, or the first 10 years, sorry. The first year would look the exact same as we covered previously. But in 10 years, you already have a difference of about $600. Now, that's pretty big, but that would be about here, about the middle of the graph on the left. What I'm going to show you is how it gets to the right, because in 20 years, in just 20 years, where in simple interest you got 2,000 extra dollars, you have $3,000. In compound interest, you have $6,727. You have a difference of over $3,000, almost $4,000, just based on the type of interest, not based on anything else. You never put money in this account again. You put $1,000 in it and you let it sit. Now with 10% returns year after year, with so much more money with compound interest. Now I'm actually going to not show you anything for a second. I'm just going to talk. Now, what I'm going to talk about is how we use compound interest. And the reason I don't want to show you anything is because using compound interest is really, really simple. And the way to best use it is really simple. And I don't want to fill your head with a bunch of different diagrams or anything. So I'm going to start by saying, obviously to use compound interest, you have to find a way to use it, which would be invest money in the stock market or find a type of bank account, right? But that's not what's most important. What's most important about using compound interest is, like you saw in the graphs, that time is the most important factor. So if you want to ask me, how do I best use compound interest? The answer is to start today. That's it. There's nothing else about it. There's no fancy secret. There's no get-rich-quick scheme about compound interest. You start today, and I promise you it'll work out better than if you start tomorrow. So that's all I have to say. And again, if you don't remember anything else from this video, just remember, the way to use compound interest is to start today. Thank you. Make sure to like and comment, and please subscribe.